Thank you, Lee. I've worked in the book business most of my working life, but I'd never thought to compare the pleasure of holding a book with the pleasure of holding my wife. And I don't know how she'd take that if I said, "Darling, I love holding you as much as I love holding the road to serfdom." I remember Auburn Waugh, who was the son of Evelyn Waugh, you might know from Brideshead Revisited, was once asked, the American Spectator usually annually has this, recommended books for Christmas, and they asked him what books he would recommend, and he said, "Well, for you Americans, I think you ought to start with the Bible and Shakespeare and work your way up from there." Likewise, I think we need to start with the Bible. I'm going to limit myself here to more or less 10 books and go down the list, but it seems to me fundamental to read the Bible. Aside from whatever divine nature we might attribute to it, you cannot be a literate person in Western civilization without having read the Bible. And I'm not overly concerned with what translation you might choose. I would think it's important to read the King James, just for its influence on our language, but the Douay Rheims will work. I like that one too. And so, the Revised Standard Version and so forth are all good. But I think it is fundamental to start with the Bible. I also think the most important subject is history. I mean, history is the experience of politics. Better than theory, we need to study actual practical history. Will Durant, who wrote that multi-volume history of the world, I think he once said that Western civilization is Caesar and Christ. And since we've covered Christ, I suppose we should go to Caesar. And though really, again, I think you could read virtually any Roman historian, Plutarch or Suetonius, but no, you could also start with Caesar's commentaries, especially for those of you who like action. But there's something about the Roman world, there's a lot about the Roman world that we bring with us to this day. And it's very important to understand those roots. In fact, I have several books that are going to touch on this. When I was growing up in the 1960s and the 1970s, one early thing that clung to me was this fear of decline. In large part, it was driven by my interest in military history, because it was during the Vietnam War. I'd seen the fall of Saigon, and I thought, this could be it. This could be all the riots in the streets and the sort of social upheaval and revolution. And so for me, I was thinking when I grew up to be an active participant in public affairs, my goal is to stop this decline. And among the books I read on this was one you probably have never heard. It was a book by Montesquieu. And it was called, it hit me right in the face. It was The Considerations on the Greatness of the Romans and Their Decline. That's what I wanted to know. Now, if you can't find that book, a virtually equally good one is Machiavelli's Discourses on Livy, because he's concerned with some of the very same questions. These are both very practical books. They look at Roman history, but they're trying to draw eternal lessons from them, eternal lessons about government. And you should also read, though you should take large parts of it with a grain of salt, Edward Gibbons' Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It's massive, and I know, you can read the whole thing, which is stupendous. Churchill allegedly read the whole thing when he was a soldier in India. But you can read condensed versions as well, which most condensed versions I've seen are actually pretty good. Gibbon is very wrong about religion, but he's very right about a lot of things too. And it's just splendid, splendid reading. Edmund Burke, Reflections on the Revolution in France. I know that everyone likes to put this book on their list, but I hope all of you have read it and absorbed it. And if you haven't, I encourage you to do so, because actually from the first time I came to Washington and started interacting with my fellow conservatives, I thought they must not have read this book. I remember going to a party that was thrown by someone who's quite famous right now. And he was a celebration of the French Revolution Party, because to him this is a great blow for libertarianism and democracy and all this sort of thing. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. I thought that was crazy then. I still think it's crazy now. But a lot of the principles that Burke lays out, which seem to me vital and crucial and true, are things that I think rub a lot of people today in a knee-jerk way the wrong way. We have the famous line, "The age of chivalry is gone, that of sophisters, economists, and calculators has succeeded." But how many conservatives today actually have no problem with that? How many of us today would say, as Burke, I mean, the other great thing about Burke is that he's so aphoristic. Every paragraph is quotable. I found this to my detriment as I was flipping through the book again and wanted to quote huge swaths of it. But never, never more shall we behold a generous loyalty to rank and sex, that proud submission, that dignified obedience, that subordination of the heart, which kept alive, even in servitude itself, the spirit of an exalted freedom. Well, A, who talks like that now? But who would also support things like that dignified obedience, that subordination of the heart? Sometimes in our libertarian celebration of freedom, I think we lose track of these more important baseline values. Burke is also great at pointing out how feudalism and monarchy were essentials to limited government, and how their abolition, as in France, meant tyranny, inevitably. And we should think about this too when we think about what is a good and proper government, what sort of government we might want to think about exporting to the world. Burke talks about how these, in fact, maybe I should just quote some of it. Again, just very briefly. "When the old feudal and chivalrous spirit of fealty, which by freeing kings from fear, feared both king and subjects and the cautions of tyranny, shall be extinct in the minds of men, plots and assassinations will be anticipated by preventive murder and preventive confiscation, and that long roll of grim and bloody maxims which form the political code of all power, standing on its own honor and the honor of those who are to obey it." You get rid of these ties between people, and what do you have? Only brute force and power. He also warns us that when we strip away tradition, we strip away what is most valuable in life. As he says, "On this scheme of things, a king is but a man, a queen is but a woman is but an animal, and an animal not of the highest order." I don't think too many of us want to go there, but that's the direction that a certain form of deracinated, false, to my mind, conservatism might take us. So on a similar note, I think you should all read James Boswell's The Life of Johnson. To a certain sort of Englishman, Johnson has almost biblical authority, and with good reason. He too, like Burke, it's just fun to read. He's very aphoristic. For example, it is Johnson who tells us that the first Whig, or the first liberal, was the devil. He's also a great reminder of something I think, again, especially those of us who are involved in politics in an active way, can all too easily forget, and to forget it is to forget that we're conservatives. It's the famous line of Johnson's that "how small of all human hearts endure, that part which laws or kings can cause or cure." Politics, ideology, is not the be-all and end-all of life. Dr. Edwards mentioned Russell Kirk. I heartily agree. The Conservative Mind, absolutely essential reading. And it's, if for nothing else, for this reminder that all politics, all political questions are really moral questions. That's very true. Start off with Branois saying that we Americans should start off with the Bible and Shakespeare. Let's get to Shakespeare. If you guys want to be participants in politics, you need to learn about leadership. And a good way to learn about leadership is with Shakespeare's Henry V. Lots of the history plays, actually, but Henry V, of course, is classic. And Henry V, though it's this rousing, stirring battle cry of a play, it ends on a very downer note. And I think that's important, too. It reminds us, in a way, of Enoch Powell's old line, that all political lives end in failure. And he's actually, they're all in failure, so they're cut off at their prime. But all political lives end in failure, and with this ending, he said, because that is the nature of politics and the nature of life. And I figure that's very true as well. My ninth book is, I think one thing that we conservatives often forget about. We're always playing defense.